After 2 decades of service, you continue to exist in the shadows, my mother remarked. I offered a subtle smile. Spirits hold on to every memory. The sun had just begun to pierce the lingering mist that wrapped around Yale's ancient stone walls as I settled into my spot at the back row. The graduation banners danced in the gentle spring breeze, while the lively notes of the brass band pierced through the soft conversations of parents, trustees, and deans dressed in their finest attire. I felt like a ghost in this place, and I had grown accustomed to that reality. As I made my way back from the base in Colorado, I kept my arrival a secret from everyone. I kept my promotion to myself, not sharing the news with anyone. It was of no consequence. Not for them. Sophie stood on stage, her crimson honor sash, gleaming blonde curls dancing as she shared a joyful embrace with her professor. My younger sister, the ideal daughter, the shining star. Her name stood out prominently on every program. Sophie Hale, with honors poised to shape the future of global finance. I looked down at the program perfectly folded and resting in my lap. My name was absent from every page. Robert simply does not. She appeared luminous. My mother's voice floated back from a few rows ahead, soft, yet resonant enough for those nearby to share in her warmth. Our Sophie, forever meant for extraordinary things. My father offered a firm nod. She embodies all our dreams and aspirations, distinct from the rest. His voice fell to a whisper that danced on the edge of secrecy, sharp enough to leave a mark. I let out a slow breath through my nose. I stood my ground. I had devoted so much time to mastering the art of remaining unflinching. A moment of stillness, then my mother shifted subtly in her seat, meeting my gaze with a glance over her shoulder. Her lips curled with a chill of amusement. After 2 decades of service, you find yourself without a true home to call your own. Just picture that. I maintained a composed expression. My smile was a fleeting whisper, a secret known only to me. Spirits exist beyond the confines of physical spaces. Spirits hold on to the legacies forged through sacrifice. Elaine faced the ceremony again, exuding the contentment of one who had just delivered a decisive conclusion. The voice of the announcer rang out, calling for Sophie with a sense of anticipation. She glided onto the stage in shimmering heels, exuding an effortless confidence, as if she were destined for this moment. Cheers filled the air. My father stood and clapped proudly, his eyes shimmering with emotion. I remained in my seat. With a broad smile, he remarked that she would be the one to support us in our later years. Claire, your destiny may hinge on your sister at this moment. In that instant, everything changed. A faint crackle echoed through the loudspeaker's feedback. Nomeker, a profound resonance throbbed beneath my feet. Then arrived the thunderous sound, the precise rhythmic sound of rotor blades cutting through the air. All eyes were drawn. The cameras were angled skyward. Faculty halted in the midst of their words, one hand shielding their eyes from the light. I looked up slowly. Out of the blue, a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter was descending. Wind tore through the decorative tents and rustled the gowns of the front row. One woman screamed as a gust knocked her hat away. The crowd stumbled backward in awe and confusion. I rose from my chair with the slow, sure movement of someone who'd done it before. My jacket, plain and dark, fluttered at the hem. I walked forward as if I belonged to the moment because I did. I could feel my mother's gaze locking on me like a laser. I didn't look back. The helicopter settled into the center of the quad, blowing grass and confetti everywhere. Its side door flung open. The sound of the rotor screamed in everyone's ears as the uniformed officer stepped out and scanned the crowd. Then he spotted me. He saluted, loud, clear, and unwavering. His voice rang out audible even over the blades. "General Hale, we need you." Every conversation froze. My father's jaw dropped. My sister's bouquet slipped from her fingers, hitting the ground in slow motion. Everyone in the school turned to look at me. "General Claire Morgan, the department needs you now." The words weren't loud, but they silenced the entire crowd. For a moment, the world contracted into a vacuum. Every sound, rustling programs, birdsong, polite applause, evaporated. Only the thudding of my own pulse remained. Then the crowd collectively turned, a silent wave of heads pivoting toward me, and I saw Reese stepping down from the chopper in full combat dress. Time did something strange. It slowed, but not in the cliché way people describe before impact. It slowed because something deeper in me, old and disciplined, slipped into gear. My spine straightened and my eyes locked on his. Lieutenant Colonel Reese Dalton, my second in command during the Phoenix Flame operation, had aged barely a day. But the silver in his hair, the hard lines etched around his mouth, those weren't from time. They were from what we had both seen, both done. Things no one here would ever understand. He came to a crisp halt 10 feet in front of me and saluted. "Ma'am, Colonel," I replied, returning the gesture. We were surrounded by civilians, professors, alumni, a sea of Yale blue robes. Reese might as well have landed on Mars. The absurdity only heightened the reverence. No one laughed, no one moved. The Yale president, a portly man in thick spectacles, hurried across the grass tie, flapping. His brow was damp, his smile twitching nervously as he reached us. "General Morgan, forgive me. I wasn't informed we had the honor of your presence today." I nodded once, my face unreadable. It wasn't announced. Reese stepped forward, offering the man a thick envelope. Orders from the Department of Defense. It's customary to present commendations in private, but under the circumstances, they requested a field presentation. The president opened the envelope with trembling fingers. I could see the seal even from here. Defense, Meritorious Service Medal plus attached clearance tags. His eyebrows shot up. Yes, of course. The murmurs grew louder. I felt them pressing in from every direction, parents whispering, students gaping, camera phones slowly rising. Elaine stood now, fingers clenched around her handbag. Robert's eyes were narrowed, calculating. Sophie. Sophie looked like someone had poured ice water down her back. Her smile faltered, but she held it barely. Reese turned toward me again. His voice dropped. "They're not just honoring you," he said quietly. "This is a tactical move. Someone's been using your credentials." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, and the words hit harder than any gunfire I'd faced. "Someone's been authorizing defense funding accounts under your ID, procurement logs, black budget access, small enough to slip past oversight, until it wasn't." A wind swept across the quad, fluttering the edges of Reese's folder. I didn't breathe. "You need to check your assets. Your name's attached to projects you didn't sign." That wasn't possible. Except it was, because I hadn't reviewed my off-duty records in months. Because I had assumed everything was locked behind the same firewalls I'd spent a lifetime building. Because I trusted too easily those who should have never had access. The Yale president cleared his throat. "General, would you mind joining us on stage? Just for a brief moment. We'd be honored to." I nodded automatically. Reese stepped aside. As I passed my family, I caught Sophie's wide eyes. She tried to speak, but the words died on her lips. My mother's mouth was a thin line. My father just stared, knuckles white. Reaching the steps, I climbed slowly, deliberately. The sun was too bright. Or maybe it was the fire rising behind my eyes. The crowd was still frozen. No one cheered. No one clapped. They were watching a revelation unravel, and they didn't know what to do with it. On stage, I accepted the medal wordlessly. A firm handshake. A photo I wouldn't see published. A soft murmur from the president about confidentiality. And through it all, the only thing I could hear was Reese's voice. "Someone's using your name." As I stepped down, Reese was waiting near the helicopter. He held the door open without a word. I hesitated for half a second, long enough to scan the stunned faces, the woman who called me a ghost, the man who said I'd depend on my sister, the girl who had taken everything without ever asking what it cost. I turned to Reese. We didn't need words. We never did. I climbed aboard the chopper. The door slammed shut. Claire looked Reese one last time before stepping into the helicopter, carrying with her the stunned stares of the entire crowd. The world saluted me, but my own family looked away. That sentence had repeated itself in my mind like the static before a storm. I had stood on a stage flanked by colonels and defense officials, yet when I glanced toward the crowd, the only eyes that refused to meet mine were the ones that had once taught me to walk. Now, I was back on military soil. Fort Myer, a place that smelled of gun oil, gravel, and discipline. Here at least the world made sense. Orders were orders. Salutes meant something. No one here questioned why I was addressed as General Morgan. Reese led me through a side corridor beneath the admin wing, his tone brisk. I flagged your name through internal security, he said. 2 hours later, I had a ping. Something odd. We entered a plain gray office. No flag, no medals, just a table and 3 folders stacked with precise symmetry. This, he said, flipping the first one open, was initiated in 2016, a line of credit tied to your Department of Defense ID. It passed the most advanced verification protocols we had at the time. He slid the contract toward me. It bore a near-perfect replica of my signature. I didn't sign this, I said coldly. I know, Reese replied, but it went through, and not just once. We found 5 linked financial instruments tied to this name, and all of them were cleared under your digital authorization key. That key was supposed to be air-gapped, encrypted. I hadn't used it in years. Reese lowered his voice. Here's the part that bothers me. Back in 2016, I delivered a contract to an address in Connecticut for a private military support fund. Nothing alarming at the time, just logistics paperwork. It was addressed to a Mr. Robert Morgan. I stared at him. You delivered something military-related to my father. Reese nodded slowly. He said it was on your behalf. Said you were out of the country and needed someone to handle stateside sign-offs. I could almost hear Sophie's voice again years ago. You're always on the outside, and honestly, you fit there better. I had thought she was just being cruel, but maybe she knew something I didn't. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Ben, the lead from internal security, stepped in carrying a flash drive. General, we cross-referenced the credit activity against your personnel file and pulled transaction logs. He plugged it into the terminal. On screen, a chart of bank deposits appeared. One stood out immediately, a transfer of $750,000 to a holding account 6 weeks after the contract date. My name was on the deposit slip. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 months later, Ben said the account was drained entirely. He clicked again, pulling up withdrawal authorization. The name flashed on screen. Robert M., legal guardian. The silence in the room was instant and crushing. My breath caught. He listed himself as my legal proxy. Ben nodded. Yes, ma'am. He filed paperwork using your military file, stated you were deployed in a classified theater and unable to manage personal assets. I pressed my hands flat against the table. Was there a notarized signature? There was. It matched state records from Connecticut. For a moment, my mind tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe my father had truly believed he was helping. But deep down, I already knew better. Robert Morgan didn't do favors. He did transactions. Reese reached across the table, placing another folder in front of me. This company, he said, was the receiving party of the funds. It's a Delaware shell firm. We started investigating them for tax fraud in 2021. We just never linked it to you until now. The folder showed the company's name, Mortec Holdings. Cold fear trickled through me. Mortec had been one of the contractors used in our humanitarian logistics mission in Northern Africa. They were infamous for billing triple for diesel shipments and claiming lost cargo that never existed. I had flagged them years ago in an internal memo, and now my name was tied to them financially. My voice came out low. He used me. Reese didn't answer. He didn't have to. Claire cross-referenced the authorization ID again. The screen blinked once. The name was still there, burned into the chain of custody, Robert M. Legal, next of kin. My heart clenched like a fist around a bullet. He borrowed my name, then buried it in silence. I sat by the window, watching the soft drizzle streak down the glass, each drop catching reflections of the amber lights on Constitution Avenue. Washington in the spring carried a quiet kind of gloom, one that crept under the skin and settled in the bones. And tonight it mirrored my own unease. The apartment was temporary, arranged through the department's sparse cold and too quiet. I hadn't unpacked. My duffel bag sat slumped in the corner like a reluctant guest, 30. That year had come and gone without fanfare. I remembered it vividly now, the birthday dinner Sophie insisted on throwing. I waited at the table for hours, sipping a drink I didn't want staring at the empty seat across from me. Robert had sent a text caught in a board meeting. We'll call tomorrow. He never did. Now I understood. The board meeting was likely a transaction, possibly one conducted in my name. The doorbell buzzed. I stood spine straightening. I'd never met Angela Ruiz in person, but she came highly recommended by Reese, a civilian attorney, who had once taken down a nonprofit CEO for stealing his brother's veteran disability checks. Angela walked in with no umbrella-soaked trench coat dripping at the threshold. "You're taller than I expected," she said, brushing wet curls from her face. "You're drier than I expected," I replied, offering a towel. She smiled faintly, took the towel, and dropped her leather briefcase on the counter. "I've reviewed the documents Reese sent." She began pulling out a printed sheet wrapped in plastic. "And I have to be honest with you, this is both worse and better than you think." I leaned over the kitchen island. The paper was a printed PDF, a scanned signature form. "That's my name," I said. "But not my pen." Angela nodded. "Exactly. The signature's too clean. Almost too clean. It lacks natural pressure deviation. This wasn't scanned from a physical document, it was digitally created." I stared at it longer. The curve of the C2 smoothed the spacing, unnaturally uniform. "What does that mean, legally?" Angela pulled out another folder, this one from a case file dated 2019. If a signature was faked using software and it was submitted as binding authorization, it constitutes federal fraud under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1028. "But it used my military ID," I said. "Wouldn't that make me partially liable?" "Not if you never consented." "And not if we can prove you were deployed at the time." I exhaled slowly. I was stationed in northern Afghanistan for that entire quarter. No access to U.S. servers. Angela's eyes sharpened. "That's exactly what I need. Do you still have your operational logs, duty rotation reports, deployment orders?" "I have all of it," I replied. She opened her laptop and typed as she spoke. "Then we start building a wall. Timeline, access records, signature, forensics, financial trail." A knock interrupted us. Ben stepped in with a flash drive. "Just pulled an old email chain from the Fort Bragg archives," he said. "This one's going to hurt." He handed it to Angela, who opened the attachment. It was an email dated June 2nd in 2016 from Reese's old CO confirming that Claire Morgan had authorized a credit-based services agreement. Attached was the same signature, this time embedded directly in the document header. Angela zoomed in, squinting. They embedded a signature into a header. That's stupid. And sloppy. That kind of alteration leaves a metadata trail. She clicked twice, revealing the file properties. "Bingo," she said. This was generated using SignaForge Pro, commercial forgery software banned for military contractors. They didn't even scrub the metadata properly. I clenched my fist under the counter. "This is enough to go to the feds." Angela didn't answer immediately. She finally looked up from her screen, gaze steady. "If I file a report tomorrow, a federal investigation will be opened. But that also means full discovery. Media could catch wind. You'll be dragged through the mud along with your father." I nodded once. So be it. But Angela wasn't done. She lowered her voice. "Let me ask you something, and I need the truth." "Okay. Are you ready to testify in court, to stand on record and publicly accuse your father of felony identity fraud?" The room seemed to shrink around me. Outside rain slicked the windows, washing the city in gray. I didn't answer right away, because part of me wasn't sure whether the ache in my chest was justice burning or grief forming. Angela's tone softened. "Are you prepared to go to court against your own father? You can serve a country. You can serve a family. But sometimes you can't serve both." The words came to me as I stood before the metal-framed desk of Colonel Harris, the officer in charge of Special Personnel Administration. His office was sterile, clean, cold, filled with the faint scent of aging leather and discipline. There were no family photos, no plants, just rows of plaques commemorating 30 years of military bureaucracy. He looked at the document I'd handed him, then back at me. "You're sure?" I nodded. "Yes. Effective immediately. I'm invoking my right to an honorable retirement under Code 619 post-deployment exemption." He studied my face for signs of doubt. There were none left. The colonel signed at the bottom, then pushed the paper into a locked tray. "Well, General Morgan, it's been an honor. If only your family knew who they'd ignored." That last part stung more than I let on. Angela met me just outside the corridor, tablet in hand, trench coat fluttering from a sudden breeze as someone opened the base door behind us. "It's done?" she asked. I gave her a small nod. She fell into step beside me. "This opens a new phase. Once we verify the timeline of deployments and finish tracking the wire paths, I'd recommend a press conference controlled sharp and timely. I'll coordinate with the department's comms team." "No leaks?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow. "From me, never." We stopped walking when we reached the glass wall facing the courtyard. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, a soft iron gray. I could feel the weight of years settle into my joints. "I visited his grave yesterday," I said, voice lower than usual. Angela didn't need to ask who. I continued. "Sergeant Pierce always said silence was our second uniform, but I'm not sure that uniform fits me anymore." We stood in quiet for a moment. Then I turned. "Let's do the press conference, and after that we go to court." Angela's expression didn't change, but her voice was steel. "Then we fight." Back in my temporary apartment that evening, the air was still thick with the kind of tension only decision brings. I had a stack of deployment logs on my desk, next to legal printouts, Reese's encrypted notes, and the military's financial audit archives. I hadn't touched any of them yet. I stared at a photograph tacked to the wall, me and Sergeant Pierce, during our last mission in eastern Ghazni. He was smiling in a way I hadn't seen since. I owed him too. I owed myself. The doorbell rang. Cautious, I looked through the peephole. No one. Just a brown envelope taped carefully to the door, no sender listed. No stamps, just hand-delivered with precision. I picked it up slowly. The paper was thick, expensive. Inside, a single handwritten letter and an official-looking document creased once down the middle. I unfolded the letter first. It was unmistakably his handwriting. "Claire, I know this isn't enough, but if you can find it in yourself, please forgive me. Dad." I stared at the page, fingers stiff. Underneath the second document, a copy of a power of attorney agreement dated July 2016. My name printed at the top, his signature at the bottom, but the line where I should have signed was blank. And yet the word scribbled across the top in his sharp cursive cut deeper than any formality ever could. I didn't have a choice. Didn't have a choice. I let the paper fall to the table. So that's what he thought this was. A plea for absolution in exchange for nothing but ink and cowardice. I rose, spine straight as a blade. If he thought forgiveness was automatic, then it was time someone taught him the price of consequence. My father forged my name. Now I would reclaim every letter of it. The conference room inside Ruiz and Associates smelled faintly of toner and fresh coffee. The windows looked out over the chaotic heart of D.C., but we were sealed in me, Angela, Ben, and Jordan Lee. It was early June, the kind of humid morning where the air already felt weighed down by secrets. Angela unrolled a stack of printed documents like she was preparing to dissect a body. "We're starting with fiscal year 2016. These are the power of attorney records pulled from military archives and the Central Credit Verification Authority." Ben added, "And these." He tapped another folder, "Are civilian loans and investments registered under your name, but funneled through a company called Meridian Impact LLC. I leaned forward, scanning the forms, my name, my military ID, my social security number, but not my signature. Meridian Impact. I said slowly, "Never heard of them." Angela didn't blink because they don't advertise. But the address on record links to a suite in an office park in Fairfax, registered under a holding company. And that holding company has a director named. She paused. Let the suspense hang in the air. Robert Morgan. My mouth went dry. Ben added more than $800,000 funneled through it from 2017 to 2020. Most of it borrowed using your identity as a secured federal asset. I stared at the page like it would offer an explanation, but all it gave me was a headache. Then came Jordan's turn. He was young, early 30s maybe, with sharp glasses and sharper hands. I ran forensic scans on the PDF. Reese gave you the one with the signature. He said the metadata was scrubbed but not completely. He clicked a few keys and a screen flickered to life. This software here used to sign the PDF was a high-end document modifier, not the kind you buy off the shelf. And this, he zoomed into a section of the file, shows a signature layer embedded independently, a digital insert. Angela looked at me, meaning it wasn't signed. It was engineered. I kept my arms folded even as my pulse pounded like a drum in my ears. But that's not all, Jordan continued. There's an embedded zip file hidden inside the original PDF as a steganographic payload. I extracted it. He tapped again. On screen appeared a scan of a driver's license mine, or at least something that looked like mine. The hair was shorter. The date of birth matched, but the eyes were wrong, the background was off, and the issue authority registered in Georgia. I've never lived in Georgia, I said quietly. No, but someone did, Jordan murmured, and the IP address that uploaded this file. Angela leaned in, was traced to a residential modem registered under Robert Morgan, 48117 West Vale Street, Arlington. The silence after that was thick. Jordan turned to Angela. This goes way beyond identity theft. She didn't respond right away. Her gaze was locked on the screen. When she did speak, her voice was almost too calm. If he forged a military-grade ID, this isn't just fraud, it's a federal felony. Class C, minimum 5 years. I stood slowly pushing back from the table. My hands trembled not from fear, but from fury, honed into stillness. My entire life had been a series of silences. Medals earned in deserts no one could spell, orders followed in shadows, and now I had to go public not for glory but for justice. I want everything I said, every document, every file, every name. We build the case, and we don't stop until the last lie burns. Angela nodded once as if sealing a pact. Ben whispered something I couldn't hear. Maybe it was a prayer or a curse. Jordan turned off the monitor. We'll need a secure server. If he suspects anything, he could start erasing data. Angela then looked at me and asked as if for confirmation, one last time, Claire. Are you ready to go all the way with this? I met her eyes. I'm ready to bury the past. But even as I said it, a strange hollowness echoed in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was speaking from strength or from the aching realization that the only family I'd ever had just crossed a line no blood could clean. Angela then whispered almost to herself, but loud enough for all of us to hear. If he forged even the ID, this isn't just fraud anymore. It's a federal crime. The world saw him as a philanthropist. I saw him signing my name with poison. The restaurant Elaine chose overlooked the Potomac, all glass walls and silk napkins folded like origami. It was the kind of place where everything sparkled glassware conversation, even the smiles were lacquered with formality. A place for people who never had to clean their own messes. I hadn't seen them all together like this in years. Elaine sat at the head of the table, her posture regal, a flawless pearl necklace wrapped twice around her throat. Robert took the seat beside her navy blazer, pristine cufflinks glinting with the Morgan family crest. Sophie sparkled, too elegant in ivory silk, her hair swept up her lips a tinted wine red. Her guests, some young diplomats, an advisor from World Bank, a lobbyist or two, drifted between flattery and champagne. I was a ghost in dress uniform, quiet, polished, watching. They toasted to Sophie's upcoming post at the World Bank, her vision for change, her unwavering sense of duty. I listened, letting the praise wash over her in waves, words I'd once wished to hear for myself. Elaine gestured toward me with an almost charitable smile. Claire decided to join us. We're honored. The table nodded politely. No one asked why I'd been gone, or where I'd been, or why my medals glinted faintly beneath the folds of my formal blazer. I waited until the third course roasted duck plated like art before I said casually, Dad, do you still remember a company called Meridian Impact? The knife in Robert's hand paused mid-slice. Just a flicker, but it was enough. He didn't look up. Should I? I smiled faintly. It came up. Old paperwork. Thought it sounded familiar. Elaine set down her wine. Claire, we're celebrating tonight. No shop talk, darling. Sophie tilted her head. Meridian, what is that? Sounds like an NGO. I turned to her. You'll love it. They claim impact hide liabilities. Very modern. Robert dabbed his mouth with a napkin. Let's not bore our guests. But I saw it, the tremor in his hand. Subtle, almost imperceptible. A shiver that traveled from knuckle to stemware. I let silence do its work. Then I reached into my small clutch and pulled out a box. Nothing grand, just a smooth black velvet case, the kind given at military commendations or retirement ceremonies. I slid it across the table to Sophie. She blinked. "What's this a gift?" I said. "From one sister to another." She opened it slowly. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple, understated, but engraved along the inside were 11 characters. 13. Bravo. 62. Claire? My deployment ID. "What does this mean?" Sophie asked, brows drawing together. "It's a reminder," I replied, sipping water, "that names matter, and that even buried things leave traces." She looked puzzled. Robert didn't move. Elaine forced a tight laugh. Claire always had a flair for metaphor. The rest of the dinner limped on pauses too long, glances too sharp. Sophie looked at me differently now, not with her usual superiority, but with a flicker of confusion, maybe even unease. Dessert was served. Coffee followed. Conversation wandered, but the air never relaxed. As we stood to leave, I walked past Robert's chair heels clicking like warnings. I stopped beside him. He didn't look up. I bent slightly, just enough for him to hear me clearly over the gentle hum of the restaurant's string quartet. "I didn't come here to apologize," I said softly. "I came to remind you I'm still alive." Then I turned and walked out, leaving behind the polished crystal, the curated smiles, and the tremble in my father's hand that had nothing to do with age. And for the first time since this all began, I felt the scales start to shift, just slightly but unmistakably. Families build legacies, but mine built a fortress of lies. The room we called the war room wasn't much more than a converted storage space inside Angela's firm bare walls. One long table, 2 whiteboards now cluttered with arrows, dates, and initials. But this was where things finally stopped being abstract. This was where we drew battle plans. Angela stood at the center, flanked by Jordan and Reese. A digital projector cast images across the wall, transaction logs, contract scans, calendar entries, my timeline. "We've tracked 27 financial entries under your name between 2016 and 2021, Angela said. "All of them while you were deployed. Germany, Belgium, Djibouti. Not a single physical presence from you stateside." I nodded. "I never authorized a single one." Jordan added, "Each contract file was digitally signed. Same metadata pattern, same server origin. Whoever did this got comfortable reusing the tools." Angela circled 2 specific dates on the whiteboard. February 3rd, 2018. July 12th, 2020. Both correspond to injections of capital into Meridian Impact. Both times Claire was abroad. I stepped forward, eyes scanning a folder Jordan laid out. "We need a witness. Someone from inside." Angela responded before I could finish. "Already working on it. Deborah Chan, former accountant at Meridian. She left in 2021. Agreed to meet." The meeting took place in a quiet conference room late that afternoon. Deborah was in her late 40s, soft-spoken but precise. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her old work laptop. "I kept copies," she said. "Some things never sat right with me, especially the contracts that were signed before they were dated." Angela leaned in. "Did you ever see the name Claire Morgan?" Deborah nodded. "Several times. The first was a fax sent from Robert Morgan's office directly to our internal server. It had a signature already on it. No initials, no trace routing. It felt off. Did you say anything at the time I asked? I asked Mr. Morgan once if we should confirm the authorization. He said, quote, 'It's already been cleared through channels beyond your pay grade.'" Angela's voice turned razor sharp. "Do you still have the transmission record?" "I do." Jordan pulled the data into our chain of custody. Reese, meanwhile, scrolled through his phone. "I found something," he said, "an archived email from 2019. It's a subject line from a communications server at Meridian." He read it aloud. "Secure using CM clearance. No delays." I froze. "CM, Claire Morgan." Angela's eyes narrowed. "That's the final link." She returned to the board and started writing. Fax document. Employee confirmation. IP logs. Financial records. Internal emails. That's 5 pillars. Reese looked at me. "Still want to stay silent?" I didn't answer. I walked to the whiteboard and added one more name under the list of involved parties, Robert Morgan. Angela then stepped back. Her voice was measured but iron hard. We have enough now. We file a formal complaint with the Office of Inspector General under federal fraud statutes, identity misappropriation, military impersonation, and misapplication of secured clearances. The room went still. Even the projector's hum seemed to hold its breath. I sat slowly, the gravity of what we were about to do settling into my spine like steel. For years, I had let silence protect them. For years, I had told myself family ties were sacred. But what they'd built wasn't a family. It was a firewall meant to shield deceit. Angela turned to me. You ready? My hands were calm now, my voice clearer than it had been in months. Send it. She gave a single nod and opened her laptop. A few minutes later, she hit submit on the Department of Defense Inspector General hotline portal. A formal federal request for civil investigation into fraudulent activities tied to Robert Morgan and the misuse of military identity. It was done, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. He built a fortress, but I found the cracks. It started with the headline, Morgan Family Rift Raises Eyebrows Over Veterans' Sudden Allegations, printed in fine serif across a double spread in Financial Insight Weekly. Someone had slipped the story in between columns on economic recovery and corporate board appointments, but I saw it, and so did half the city. The article was laced with terms like unsubstantiated claims, family dispute, and a former military officer whose allegations coincided suspiciously with a state restructuring. They didn't use my name outright, but it didn't matter. The photo did that for them. A cropped image from my Yale appearance the moment I stepped toward the helicopter. Sharp uniform, cold stare, the kind of picture that begged for controversy. Angela tossed the magazine onto the conference table. This was deliberate. I scanned the byline. Maxwell Denton, financial gossip masquerading as analysis. Guess who Maxwell used to ghostwrite for? Angela continued, her tone bitter. One of Robert's old business partners, a man who handled press for Morgan Asset Holdings back in 2014. My throat tightened. So this is how he plays now. Angela gave a short nod. Distraction, discredit, delay. That same afternoon, Sophie showed up outside my apartment. No text, no warning. She just appeared, standing rigid in a navy pencil skirt, her arms crossed like armor. You started this, she asked, holding the magazine like a weapon. I told the truth. She stepped closer. Mom said you were spiraling, that you're trying to drag us down with you. I didn't believe her until now. Sophie, I have proof, documents, testimony. Then why leak it like this? She snapped. Why try to ruin Dad's reputation in front of the world? My voice shook, but not from fear. I didn't leak anything. But maybe it's time someone did. She blinked, thrown for half a second. He built everything we have. Everything you wear, the house we grew up in, the education we got. He built it using my name, I snapped. And he's using you to bury the fallout, Sophie faltered. He forged my identity. I said each word a blade. He impersonated my clearance. And now he's trying to paint me as unstable to cover it up. Silence stretched between us. She didn't storm off, but she didn't stay either. She left the magazine on my steps. 2 days later, I was summoned by the Alliance of Distinguished Veterans. Not a courtroom, not a military tribunal, but it felt just as sharp. 3 decorated members, gray-haired, stiff-spined, sat across from me in a wood-paneled room near Arlington. We're receiving inquiries about your conduct, General Morgan, one of them said. Concerns about the integrity of your record. I'm not here to defend my record, I said. I'm here to defend my identity. They exchanged glances. Another man added, There's discussion in the community, rumors, allegations. We'd like you to clarify them before they gain traction. I inhaled slowly. My file is clean. My deployments are verified. My clearance is documented. What's not clean is what's being done in my name by someone who shares my blood. They didn't nod, but one of them said softly, This is a dangerous path, General. Are you sure you're prepared to walk it alone? I wasn't. Not entirely. But I left with my head high. That night, I stared at the spread from the magazine again. They digitally darkened the photo, cut it at a sharp angle, made my face harder, colder. And beneath it, In bold italics, power struggles inside the Morgan family raised concerns about stability and motive. Tears burned behind my eyes. He wasn't just stealing my identity anymore. He was trying to erase me. I closed the page and pressed my hands against the table. My breath hitched once, but I forced it down. My phone buzzed. A message from Ben saw the article. Don't let him define the narrative. Your truth is still yours. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. And then I opened my laptop. If Robert Morgan wanted a war, he was about to find out what kind of soldier he'd created. When the world turned against me, I remembered who I was, a soldier. And soldiers don't run. The air at Colorado Springs was thin, but sharp, just like I remembered. It had been 6 years since I last stood on the tarmac of Fort Carson. Back then, I was boarding a plane bound for Djibouti. Today I came to reclaim something no plane could carry. Lieutenant Colonel Griffin met me outside the records division. He was older now, silver brushing the edges of his buzz cut, but still straight-backed, still exact. Claire, he said, offering a hand. Didn't think I'd see your name in whispers again. But I read between the knees. We sat inside a low-lit archive room, the kind that smelled of old ink and varnished wood. Griffin slid a black folder across the table. This is the log of your active operations from 2016. Deployment codes, base access, sign-in timestamps, every move. I flipped through the contents. My boots were on Romanian soil on April 9, 2016, attending joint NATO exercises. That was the day Meridian's fraudulent contract was allegedly signed in D.C. I circled the line entry. This is the nail. Not the only one, Griffin added, producing a small drive. You were flagged in a secure line call that year. It was reviewed by compliance but never elevated. Might be relevant now. Angela connected the drive to her secure laptop. Static buzzed for a moment, then a voice calm, familiar filled the room. She's deployed. Doesn't need to be involved. I'm her legal proxy. We'll push it through. No, she won't know she trusts me. I'm her father. My stomach twisted. It was him, Robert Morgan, in his own voice, justifying identity fraud. Angela's face was pale. That's it. He declared himself your guardian despite you being an active duty officer with no legal restrictions. Is this admissible? I asked. She nodded slowly. If we can verify the chain of custody and we can... It's damning. Reese entered, then carrying a manila envelope. Final piece, he said. Internal report from 2017. Someone raised a red flag at the Department of Military Financial Operations about discrepancies in a contract using your clearance code. The case was buried. The reviewer was transferred a month later. Angela pieced everything together. Timeline, audio, deployment logs, financial trails, witnesses, digital forensics. She looked up at me. We're ready. My hand hovered over the confirmation form, an official statement of accusation addressed to the Federal Department of Defense Inspector General. My name, my rank, my voice. I, Major General Claire Morgan, formally accuse Robert Morgan of identity fraud, misrepresentation, and unauthorized use of military classification access for personal and financial gain. My pen scratched across the page. It felt like armor. Angela sealed the folder. We'll submit this with the full evidence package. They'll have no choice but to act. Just then her phone buzzed. She picked it up, listened, then nodded sharply. They've agreed. The case will be heard publicly at the Federal Civil Review Board in D.C. When Angela met my gaze, July 14th. That was less than 3 weeks away, she added, quieter now, and he'll be required to appear under subpoena. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle. 7 years of silence, of wondering if I was crazy, of questioning my worth, to the very people who raised me now condensed into one date. My fingers curled into fists. This wasn't just about reclaiming my name anymore. It was about making sure no one ever carved theirs into me again. I didn't need their validation, but I would make them witness the truth. The federal hearing room was colder than I expected, not by temperature, but by tone. Beige walls, frosted glass, dull carpet, and a solemn circle of authority. There were no sweeping gestures or raised voices here, only the quiet echo of consequence. Angela adjusted her lapel mic. I stood to her right, in uniform. Robert sat directly across, flanked by two defense attorneys in gray suits. Sophie was next to him, shoulders drawn and eyes flicking between us and the silent observers. She looked like someone who had just stepped onto a battlefield without knowing a war had been declared. The lead commissioner tapped the microphone. This preliminary review will assess the validity of claims brought forth by Major General Claire Morgan regarding identity fraud, abuse of classified credentials, and financial misconduct. Angela stood. We will demonstrate that between 2016 and 2021, Mr. Robert Morgan knowingly used the name, identity, and military clearance of his daughter without her knowledge or consent, resulting in illegal financial gain and personal harm. She began with the metadata trail documents edited using military-grade font renderers traced back to a residential IP in Bethesda Roberts' home address. Then came the bank records transactions executed under accounts linked to CM Morgan with power of attorney filed under emergency deployment pretext, the fake signature, the forged ID, upload the internal voice recording. Angela played the clip. She won't know. I'm her father. I'm her proxy. Robert's jaw clenched. I kept my eyes on the table, fingers gripping the edge like a tether. When Angela finished, the room paused. A quiet so sharp it felt like a knife balancing on glass. Robert rose slowly. His voice, when it came, was polished, too polished. I did what I had to do. The markets were volatile. Our family's assets were in danger. Claire was unreachable, serving in unstable regions. I made a decision, one that protected all of us. You made it without me, I said, standing. He glanced at me. I'm your father. That doesn't make you my author. His attorney interjected. Mr. Morgan operated under the belief that he had legal standing. No. Angela cut in. He assumed power he did not have and used that assumption to manipulate systems meant to protect classified personnel. The commissioner turned to me. General Morgan, would you like to state in your own words the impact of these actions? I stepped forward. When I returned from deployment, I expected home to be a place of rest. Instead, I found my name carved into files I never touched, debts I never approved, and decisions I never made. My voice didn't shake. My clearance wasn't just a badge, it was a trust. And he used that trust to gamble, to deceive. And worst, he did it knowing I couldn't respond. Because I was overseas in uniform serving the country he used as a shield. Sophie's gaze had dropped to the table. Angela handed over one final document. This account, she said, was opened under the name Claire M. Morgan, but lists Sophie as the sole secondary beneficiary. It was funded by siphoning money from the original Meridian contract. Robert's mouth opened, but no words came. Sophie blinked. What? She looked at the page. Her name typed beneath mine. No mistaking it. You used me, she whispered, turning to him. He didn't deny it. The commissioner made a note. The session will reconvene in 72 hours for final recommendations. Until then, all parties are instructed not to discuss proceedings publicly. The gavel dropped. Chairs creaked. Lawyers murmured. Reporters scribbled. I turned toward him, my father. He stood still, staring at the blank surface before him. You didn't just betray me, I said softly but clearly. You turned me into a tool, into leverage, into a name you could sign and discard. He didn't reply, but for once he didn't look away either. He tried to erase me with a pen. I wrote myself back with truth. The hearing resumed at 9 or so a.m. sharp, but the energy was different, denser, heavier. The air carried something electric, a sense that the next few hours would tilt the world on its axis. Camera crews were restricted to the far wall. Reporters whispered from the designated press bench, their pens poised like bayonets. On the floor, the faces remained mostly the same, but postures had shifted. Robert looked paler. Sophie sat rigid, her arms crossed, gaze neutral but unsteady. Angela leaned in. Deborah's ready. Deborah Chan took the stand, slight unassuming hair, neatly pulled back. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and looked directly at the panel. I worked at Meridian Impact LLC between 2015 and 2018 as senior accountant. In late 2016, I received a fax signed under the name Claire Morgan, approving a secondary account transfer for offshore investments. She held up a printed sheet. The page yellowed slightly with time. I recognized the fax number. It belonged to Robert Morgan's personal office. Robert shifted in his seat. His attorney didn't move. And you can confirm the commissioner asked that this signature appeared inconsistent with authorized procedures. Yes, Deborah said firm. It bypassed the standard dual verification, and the language was rushed unprofessional. At the time, I didn't know it was forged, but in hindsight, it was clear. Angela stood again. May I submit for the record scanned documents showing Claire Morgan was deployed to Eastern Europe during that period with no recorded access to domestic communication channels. Next came Griffin calm deliberate, with folders lined in perfect sequence. These are Claire Morgan's official deployment logs. He said her GPS chain of command assignments encrypted comms. Every point confirmed she was never within reach of that fax or account activity. He paused, letting the silence give weight. Furthermore, this document he handed Angela, a sealed envelope, contains an internal memo flagged in 2017. Subject line, CM fallback liability, emergency use only. Angela read the line aloud. The room tensed. This phrase, she said, is used exclusively when a civilian attempts to use classified personnel data to shield financial risk. It's a red flag, one that was buried until now. Robert stood abruptly. I'd like a recess, he said, voice sharp. His attorney looked startled. Robert, I said I want a recess. Now the panel exchanged glances. The late commissioner frowned. On what grounds? Robert leaned into his lawyer, whispered something, then sat back and said nothing. The panel paused, then 5-minute recess granted. Chairs scraped, murmurs rose, but no one left. Angela leaned toward me. He's folding. I nodded. My heart was racing, but my expression didn't betray it. This wasn't triumph. Not yet. Sophie turned toward me. Her hand reached for mine, trembling. How long have you known? She whispered in our native tongue. How long have you known her eyes weren't angry? They were lost, softened by a realization so sharp it cut without bleeding. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I closed my fingers around hers, for once not as a soldier, not as a witness, but simply as her sister. Truth doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just brings silence. The world didn't explode. It simply stopped. 1 week after the hearing, the Justice Department announced formal charges: identity theft, federal fraud, abuse of classified access, and obstruction of military records. Robert Morgan's name was stripped from the advisory board of the National Finance Committee by noon the same day. His assets, over $17 million in investments and property, were frozen under a federal motion to prevent asset dissipation. Every financial outlet that had once praised his philanthropic legacy now dissected the rot beneath it. Articles with words like betrayal, disgrace, and deception flooded the media. The image of a man once applauded for advancing trust and defense finance partnerships was now reduced to a still frame: Robert exiting a federal courthouse expression, unreadable, hands empty. But the headlines didn't mention me. Angela respected my decision. No interviews, no statements. The Army had released a quiet statement confirming the legitimacy of my service record, but my name was not pushed into the spotlight. I asked them not to, because I didn't want the world to know my father had stolen from me. I wanted him to know he could never do it again. Sophie called 3 days after the verdict. She didn't cry. She simply said, I've given my resignation. I can't sit in that office knowing how I got there. She moved into a friend's apartment uptown. Elaine didn't protest. The last time they were seen together in public was at a silent charity auction, both looking in opposite directions. I stood alone outside the old Morgan residence on Westchester Lane. The front hedges were trimmed the same way they always were. The windows sparkled, but the lights inside were dim. Reese had offered to drive me. I declined. Angela had asked if I wanted to release a formal statement of closure. I declined that too. Closure wasn't something I believed in. The door creaked open before I even knocked. Inside, the silence wrapped around everything like dust. The grand piano was gone. The family portraits had been taken down. Only pale rectangles remained on the walls like bruises that never healed. Elaine sat in the center of the living room, hands folded over her lap. She didn't stand up. She looked smaller than I remembered, still elegant, still cold, but the edges had dulled. She didn't say hello, didn't ask why I'd come. She just asked one question. You always knew, and yet you still came back. I looked at her, really looked. At the woman who had once shared her belief that love was something to be earned through acts of service, who had measured my quietude against Sophie's praises, who claimed I existed like a specter. Perhaps I did. I found myself sitting opposite her, not to dispute, not to place blame. Yet even spirits find their way back to where they belong. At times, it's not about seeking revenge. At times, it's not even about seeking answers, simply for the resonance, the haunting resonance of unfulfilled dreams. And for the first time, there was a silence between us, a void where words once flowed freely. The uniform never granted me value. What I endured shaped me. Glistening reflections danced across the immaculate marble floors of the Pentagon's Grand Hall. A silence enveloped the gathering of more than 500 dignitaries and their elaborate attired journalists, ready with their pens and civilians at the rear, stretching their necks to catch a glimpse. I stood at the edge of the stage, unapologetic and unyielding, not seeking anyone's approval for my existence. This time I received an invitation. The Master of Ceremonies concluded the tribute highlighting steadfast integrity amidst institutional betrayal and outstanding service in the covert operations abroad. Major General Claire Morgan is honored with the Distinguished Service Medal. The applause began hesitantly at first, not from uncertainty but from deep respect. I sensed it not as a loud display, but as a quiet yet powerful acknowledgement that resonated within me, a recognition that has been awaited for far too long. Reese found herself seated in the front row. He may not have been the loudest in applause, but his gaze remained fixed on me. Sophie occupied a seat just 2 away from him, her thoughts swirling as she tried to gauge his reaction. She held back her tears, not any longer, simply observing. I approached the podium with a mix of anticipation and resolve. "Thank you," I said softly. My voice remained steady, unwavering under the intense glare of the lights. I was led to believe this moment would bring a sense of closure. But that's not quite how I would describe it. As closure suggests there was something I needed to atone for. A soft whisper flowed among the gathered people. I find myself here today, not due to any perfection, but because I chose to remain visible and resilient. I would not allow myself to be diminished by the quiet, even when that quiet originated from those meant to safeguard me. I allowed the words to linger in the air. The truth I carry forward stands strong on its own without the need for an audience. It doesn't seek validation. It simply requires expression regardless of whether anyone is there to hear it. From a distant place behind me, Reese leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think they're listening, Claire." I hesitated, allow myself to take a moment to breathe. And so I declared, lifting my gaze to the cameras, capturing every moment I speak, not out of vengeance, but in pursuit of understanding. I am not Robert Morgan's daughter. I am Major General Claire Morgan. And I etched my name into the fabric of history. Stillness enveloped the moment, a prolonged, serious rhythm. Then the clapping erupted, this time with a bold voice, ascending, enduring. Angela approached me quietly at the edge of the stage. Her expression was gentle, weary, yet filled with a sense of pride. She leaned closer. "Well then, what comes next? What about family dynamics?" I gazed beyond her, beyond the throng, focusing on Reese, on Sophie, in honor of those who never returned, and I smiled softly, yet completely. Family, I declared, is something I will restore, from those who have always stood by me. Later that night, I found myself in solitude within the modest office they had designated for the ceremony. A modest wooden box rested on the desk before me, within the confines of the metal. Beside it, I set a photograph, its corners worn and softened by the passage of time. My team, Phoenix Flame, those who were never awarded their medals, who remained unacknowledged in the silence of their existence. I set the medal down next to the picture and gently shut the box. Justice had arrived, delayed, flawed, but that's sufficient, and I had finally stepped into the light. The courtroom was enveloped in silence, yet the reverberations of the truth she unveiled would endure far beyond any fleeting applause. The man who had once taken her identity now stood before everyone revealed, while she no longer concealed in the darkness, stood with newfound strength and confidence. Justice, after a lengthy wait, had at last come to fruition, not as revenge, but as a reckoning shaped by bravery and determination. Like the last note of an old song, justice might come after a while, but when it resonates, it lingers on. If this story resonated with you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if you believe the justice was well deserved, or 2 if you think Claire deserved even more.